The Nile is not a river. It is a memory. For 5,000 years, it has carried the dreams of gods and the blood of kings into the salt of the Mediterranean. But in the year 69 BCE, the river held its breath. A child was born in Alexandria, the city of marble and light, a girl named Cleopatra. While her sisters played at war in the palace corridors, Cleopatra walked the halls of the great library. She did not just read the scrolls, she whispered to them. She mastered the tongues of 9 nations, not to trade, but to command. She understood that power was a frequency. In the incense-choked temples of Memphis, she was not just a princess, she was a student of the old magics. She learned that to rule Egypt, one must become the Nile itself, fluid, life-giving, and occasionally devastating. The stars over Alexandria whispered a prophecy. She would be the last of her kind, the final spark of a dying sun. Betrayal is the shadow of the throne. Cast out by her own brother and his plotting advisors, Cleopatra found herself in the silence of the Syrian desert. Here, the living Isis was stripped of her gold, left with nothing but her name and the wind. But the desert is where the soul is forged. In the cold nights under 1,000,000 stars, she realized that Rome was the predator at the gate. Julius Caesar, the Roman lion, had arrived in Alexandria to settle the debts of her father. Her brother offered Caesar a throne. Cleopatra offered him a mystery. She knew she could not march an army into the city, so she wrapped herself in a simple rug, a vessel for a queen. When that rug unrolled in the candlelight of the palace, and she stood before the most powerful man in the world, the air didn't just change, it shattered. It was the first time Rome truly looked into the eyes of Egypt, and Rome blinked. The union of Caesar and Cleopatra was a cosmic alignment. Together, they sailed the Nile on the Thalamagos, a floating mountain of cedar and ivory. For months, they drifted past the pyramids, which were already ancient even then. Cleopatra showed Caesar the heart of her kingdom, not the granaries or the gold mines, but the soul of the people who saw her as the goddess Isis return to earth. In Rome, they whispered of her enchantments. They called her a sorceress because they could not understand a woman who ruled by intellect as much as by grace. When she entered Rome in a procession that defied the imagination, she sat atop a golden sphinx, her presence a silent declaration that the East would not be conquered. It would be wedded to the West. But the daggers of the Senate were already being sharpened. The Ides of March weren't just the end of a man. They were the beginning of a tragedy that would span the seas. With Caesar dead, the world fractured. Enter Mark Antony, a man of fire, appetite, and fury. Cleopatra knew that to save Egypt, she must capture the heart of Rome's new champion. Their meeting at Tarsus was the greatest piece of theater in human history. She arrived on a ship with purple sails, the oars tipped with silver that beat time to the music of flutes and harps. She lay under a canopy of cloth of gold, dressed as Venus, while the scent of her perfumes drifted for miles inland. Antony, the hardened soldier, was undone before she even spoke. They became the inimitable livers, a duo that spent their nights in the taverns of Alexandria, disguised as commoners, and their days as living gods. They envisioned an empire where the sun never set, a kingdom of the East that would rival the cold stone of Rome. But the fates are jealous of such light. dream began to fray at Actium. The Roman fleet, under the cold command of Octavian, closed in like a vice. In the chaos of the sea battle, the mystical thread snapped. Cleopatra saw the end before it arrived. She turned her ships back to Alexandria, followed by a broken Antony. The city of light began to dim. As Octavian's legions marched across the sands, Cleopatra retreated to her mausoleum, a house of stone built to hold her treasures and her secrets. She watched from the high windows as the Roman wolf circled her palace. There was no more magic in the swords, no more fire in the hearts of her men. There was only the silence of the tomb and the weight of a crown that had become too heavy for this world. Cleopatra did not die a victim. She died a priestess. She dressed in her royal robes, the breastplate of a pharaoh, and the crown of the two lands. She would not be led through Rome in chains to be mocked by the plebeians. She would choose her own exit. Legend says she called for a basket of figs, within which lay the sacred asp, the uraeus, the protector of kings. The bite was not a death. It was a transition. As the poison moved through her, the legend says she saw the Nile one last time, stretching out like a silver vein into eternity. She died as she lived. An enigma. Octavian found only a queen of marble, cold and triumphant in her silence. The line of the pharaohs ended, but the myth of Cleopatra was born. She slipped from history into the stars, forever the queen of the Nile, forever the woman who dared to dream that a goddess could rule the world of men.